Welcome to the Exercise is Health podcast, where we're talking about exercise, health, and the interconnectedness of the two. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we will be coming to you every single week from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Exercise is Health podcast. We're your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we are coming to you from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg in Schaumburg, Illinois. Now, at Muscle Activation Schaumburg, we believe that your health is your most valuable asset. Your health is one of the biggest influencers of the quality and quantity of time that you have. And while there are many aspects of health, our expertise is exercise. Exercise has been proven time and again to not only improve your health, but also increase your longevity and improve your quality of life. But we know that exercise is not the only piece of the puzzle, and that is why we are bringing you a rock star guest today, none other than Dr. Bikram Dhillon. Dr. Dhillon joins us from his practice here in Schaumburg. And Dr. Dhillon, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Charlie, and thank you, Julie. It's a pleasure to be with you. I think we've been working together for some time now, and I've always been a big fan of the work you do, the detail that you go into with your patients, your clients, and just am very impressed. And I'm so glad that you and I are in the same neighborhood.
Yeah, you are literally just down the street from us, which makes it super convenient, and you're very grateful that you're with us today. So tell us more about your practice. Tell us kind of how did you get started, not only in medicine, but then doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. Yeah, I'm actually trained as an emergency physician, so I've been practicing medicine for about 30 years now. And been working in the wellness space and in literally optimization and performance optimization for about 10 years. Yeah, I've been working in that previously and studying it, but actually our practice has been about 10 years. And our office has been open since 2010. And so it's a wonderful space to practice in, and we can talk a little bit about how that journey went by.
Absolutely. We'd love to hear it, because it seems like you're playing at kind of two ends of the spectrum in a sense, where you're doing, emergency medicine and then, wellness care. And so we definitely want to hear about how you got into both and, what was intriguing to you about being able to do both.
Yeah. It's a great question, Charlie. And I appreciate that. When I went into medicine, my goal was really, how do I help people be as healthy as they can be? How do I help them to not experience problems that have been categorized as medical? Now, that's a difficult thing as we go through, because there's so much involved in the business of medicine. There's so much involved in looking at acute aspects versus chronic aspects. And I think that we've come to understand that chronic disease processes play a big role in what we're experiencing as poor health. And we can talk a little bit about what health actually means. But in the emergency room, what I'm encountering is the consequences largely of chronic problems that have not been addressed adequately. And what I've come to understand is there are individuals who are proactive about their health, and there are individuals who will take a wait-and-see approach. And when I finally realized that, I said, there are people who are being proactive, who want to be proactive about their health, don't have an opportunity to be proactive. They're sold pieces of it. This, you can have this, diet this month, or this diet this year, or this type of exercise, and you would never do that. You take a detailed approach. You do a detailed assessment of your clients. You're looking at their functionality. You're looking at individuals, right? Rather than doing a general approach. That's the value of what you do. If I say, is there a value added of Muscle Activation Schaumburg? It is that you are doing a detailed, individualized approach on your clients. You're not treating them like pull this book off the shelf and here, this is what you do.
Right.
Yeah, I've seen your assessments. They're not your usual assessments, right? And then the implementation, when you or Julie are implementing, you are implementing in a detailed way, and not the same thing at every visit. It's, okay, you've made this much progress, now let's move on to this. So the same detail applies in so many other areas within what we might categorize medicine. But I would like to really call that space health. Okay. Now, if somebody is proactive or wants to be proactive about what it is that constitutes their health, right? I think they deserve the tools to be able to do that. And so when I established my practice, what I really wanted to do was provide people the tools that they could use to be proactive about their health.
Very cool.
Right? And
Very cool.
And the problem is it doesn't fit into a category.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right? It's easy to tell people this is the category, but what's the category you need to feel good? What's the category you need to have joy in your life? What's the category you need? These defy categorization, right?
Right.
So if we really want to help people feel healthy, I mean, what's health? Health is simply the ability to live your life to the fullest that you can. Now, that's not just physical. It's not just mental. It's not just, it's a combination of those things. Yeah. I've often been struck in the emergency room. I unfortunately encounter people who have attempted suicide. And and the next patient I'll have will be somebody who is suffering from cancer, right? And these are almost opposite approaches. Now, the person who has attempted to commit suicide is often very physically healthy. You look at them and you say, this person has no health problems, right? But they don't have the desire to live. Now, that is a problem. That is itself a health problem, right? It's not apparent, but it's a health problem. Another person may have cancer and they're fighting tooth and nail to survive. They have that desire to live and they're having physical problems, right? Now, both of these patients are having health problems.
Right.
So health is not, and you know how much exercise plays a role in depression. You know how much these, there's it's not, you can't categorize things. And so how do you go about looking at somebody as a whole and then individualizing their problem and saying, look, let's work on the issue that is impeding your health now. That's the same way you do. Let's address that, and then we'll see what the next nail is that sticks up.
Sure.
We'll address that.
That's awesome. That's very cool.
So what are common things that people seek you out for? Because obviously you have this very in-depth approach, and you've mentioned a couple interesting things that I think are kind of cool. You're like, these problems categorized as medicine, and you're kind of taking this whole health approach. What are common things that you see people coming in with that you deal with kind of on the week-to-week basis? Yeah,
thank you, Julia. I appreciate that. It's a great question. And I think that people often come to me because they can't really define what the problem is. And I think that's what I really enjoy the most, because when somebody can't define what the problem is, but there's something wrong, right? Then we get to work on the whole range. When somebody comes in and says, I have a problem, with weight, then they're really categorizing things in those terms. And we'll look at it as broadly as we can. And some people are open to looking at that in a broad context, and some people want to look at it very narrowly, and that's fine. It's whatever anybody wants to have done.
Sure.
But if we look at, let's talk about stress. Where do you turn when stress is an issue, and how do you identify that stress is a problem? It's probably one of the leading causes of disease that we have is stress.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't fit naturally into a category. Do you see a psychiatrist? Do you see a psychologist? Do you talk to your family? Or and so sometimes none of those are options. And I find especially for men who tend not to talk as much as women, and tend not to establish those relationships or create a life that doesn't allow that. I find it's very problematic. That doesn't mean that women don't have the same problem.
Sure.
It's just that men generally tend to have that problem more because they don't create the network of relationships. Generally speaking, broad generalizations. But I find that it's useful to help people to understand that what is the role that stress is playing in my life. Now, what do I do about it? Right. One of the reasons that when I realized that stress was one of the largest contributors to illness, right, is I sat back before I entered into space and I wrote a book, and that book was The Diamond Rule.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah. And so the Diamond Rule is really my attempt to look at what is it that creates stress, how do we unwind that, and how would a sincere individual looking to move through their life create a structure that allows them to minimize the stress in their life so that they don't have that as a contributant to poor health. How do you eliminate? How do you minimize the role of stress?
Sure.
And the stressors are there are millions of stressors, right?
Yeah.
They just come in different flavors, but they have a certain type of an area they reside in, right? And so how do we pull them out of that, and how do we address those? So I always find that the areas that are most interesting for me are areas where we run into conflicts in two paradigms. We'll have your work and your family is a classic one, right? How do you integrate those two paradigms? You want to be fully functional at work, you want to be fully functional at home, but you can't do everything you want to do at work and everything. So you have to bring them back down to say, okay, where does this intersect? Where does this intersect? And that's unique to a couple. Now, as you've been moving through your life, you've encountered this. You've had to address it, and you're doing things successfully on the work front. You're doing things successfully on the family front, and that's great. It's beautiful to see. But you've done that, right? So stress goes into, when we look at stress, we think, okay, what is it that is happening in my life, and what should be happening in my life?
Okay.
And that's stress is the distance between those two.
Yes,
So evaluating that should is what the book is about.
Very cool. So then would you say that your practice is predominantly built around the idea of kind of identifying the areas of stressors and then figuring out how to address those, remove those, or better manage those, kind of in the attempt to help somebody get healthy?
Yeah.
Is that kind of the idea?
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, that is one of the ideas.
Okay.
So if we look at contributants to poor health, right, the largest contributant is really infectious disease, right? We don't face that because we have live in a system that has addressed most of those infectious disease concerns that have killed us throughout the millennia.
Yeah.
Right? So we take that for granted, right? We shouldn't take that for granted. It's
true.
It's an incredible thing, right?
Yeah.
We're not dropping dead of the plague.
Right.
We're not, having, Spanish influenza.
Right.
Thank God we haven't had
exactly
something like that. There are all these diseases that we have that public health and medicine have helped to eradicate or control.
Yes.
That we can be thankful for every day. Right. That's a big part of minimizing stress is gratitude.
Yeah. Oh, great point.
Right, and so just recognizing that is huge, right? Otherwise, we would be spending a lot of time, a lot of energy on these things. Okay, so that aside, the issues that contribute to poor health now are largely chronic diseases. Diseases such as arthritis, such as heart disease, such as elevated blood pressures and elevated cholesterol levels that contribute to heart disease. There are other things that contribute to heart disease, but it's the same things contribute to stroke and dementia. And so these chronic diseases are what really decrease our wellness now. And so how do we minimize that? And exercise is a great example. Exercise helps in so many ways. It helps psychologically. It helps physiologically. At the cellular level, it helps with distribution of nutrients throughout the body. It creates gradients that allow for deficiencies to be addressed. When we use supplementation to help with health, exercise is one of the things that helps to titrate, to move things into particular parts of the body. Because what you're doing is you're sending signals to your body that this area needs this, right? And when you're taking a vitamin, multivitamin, when you're taking a specific type of a supplement, right? You may take it, you may ingest it, but how does it get to where it needs to go? Exercise and what you facilitate, and exercise is one of the best ways to send signals to the body that more of this needs to go to more of this location. And you've been doing that every day. Every day that you both are working with this, Julie, Charlie, you are helping people to optimize their utilization of their supplementation.
Nice.
Very cool.
We'll use that in our next exercise podcast.
Exactly.
Research on
yeah, that is really cool.
Right.
That is really cool.
Yeah. So and psychologically, how does exercise help psychologically? You've seen the studies on depression and exercise, right? And so there are many. We tend to again categorize things, and they defy categorization because the body is so complicated.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it, right? But that's also the opportunity of it. So if I look at health and I say, what are the primary areas that we can work at with regards to health, for somebody who wants to be proactive, right? You want to take an active role in this. You want to take ownership. If you really want to take ownership, stress is probably the biggest one, right? After that is inflammation, right? And then following that, we have exercise, sleep, right? These are the bigger players in this. And then we get into diet, right? People are surprised. Diet plays a big role, right? It's something that you do 3 times a day, maybe more, maybe less, but let's say 3 times a day. One of those things that you do every single day. And so the things that we do commonly, like thinking and imagining ourselves in particular situations, stress, big thing, right? Eating, something we do every day, it's going to create a lot of opportunities for stressors. How do we encounter our environment? We encounter it by our senses, but we also encounter it by our food. Our food is literally our environment flowing through us.
That's a really interesting perspective. I like that. Yeah.
Right. And so when we start to look at, and a lot of what I do in the office is I explore different paradigms with people. So I think people are smart. People really get stories. People really get visions. They don't get words. Just a list of things to do and don't do. They don't. You know that. People, and nobody gets it. I don't get that. I don't like it. Right. I like to hear, what is the context within which this exists? How can I examine this issue in a different way that all of a sudden it doesn't look like the same thing? It looks like something that's manageable, something that we can do something with, right?
Yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah,
very cool.
It's fun.
Yeah, I bet.
I think it's really interesting how we've been talking about, you've kind of been exploring these chronic, you kind of said it's chronic diseases or chronic problems. And when I think of chronic, I think of these things that are building up, over time as this long term. And a lot of times chronic problems, they might be a little pestering, but they're not stopping us from doing everything we want. Maybe some things, but then you said when you're in the ER, you see a lot of things that are actually chronic problems. So it's almost like you see the side where these chronic problems that are, as you were mentioning, highly manageable by lifestyle choices, turn into this almost like acute, maybe potentially life-threatening problem that you get to see. And I don't think a lot of us get to see that. If we're working in health and we're not in the hospital or emergency room, we're not seeing how these, day-to-day small, tiny choices are leading to these chronic problems. Well, I guess we see that part, but we don't get to see the part where they show up in the ER. That's really an interesting idea to me because I don't think we often think about it. We don't think about how our diet every single day might lead us to the ER one day and making our families nervous for our well-being. Or we don't think about how our, lack of exercise every single day might lead us to a life-threatening experience. But it's interesting you brought that up, and I was just kind of marinating over that while you were speaking about how everything is almost like a lifestyle choice. So I appreciate that contradiction because it needs to be brought up to light, and it's actually not really a contradiction. It's just kind of in the shadow a lot of times.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. It really is fascinating. I think that the space we work in is fascinating because there's this whole web of interactions and process, right? And nothing. Your car doesn't just break down. I mean, it does break down one day,
sure,
right? But it was in the process of breaking down for a long time. You didn't get the oil changed. You've neglected to fix that thing that was making that knocking noise.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, you're on the side of the road, right? So you may say that my car broke down today, but no, your car's been breaking down for a while, and now it just happened to have this catastrophic event today. Right. So we simplify things to our own detriment. That's what I'm talking about, being proactive. So people who are proactive, they don't ignore the warning signs.
Yeah.
Right. And they also don't ignore the statistics that precede warning signs. Right.
Yes.
So I always talk to my patients about levels of causation. There's proximate causation, there's ultimate causation, and then there's the foundation for causation. Right? So the foundation for causation, you participate in that every day. You may have somebody who's perfectly healthy. You help them to optimize. You may work with a runner, and they're having some problem with their knee or their hip, and they may have some problem with the knee. It's actually a problem with their hip. but they identified as a problem with their knee, right? So now and that may just be because of their running style. It may be because of some muscle abnormality in terms of strength. Habitually they're right-footed and they haven't been working the left side because that's just the way that their mind works, their brain works, right?
Sure.
So we're actually working on their brain and their spine when they came in and identified a problem with their knee.
Right.
Right? So there's approximate causation, which is knee pain, right? There's ultimate causation, which is their imbalance, and then there's the substrate of causation, which is the way their minds are operating, right? So it's a great example, right?
Yeah.
So it works in every part of medicine and in wellness. If we allow it to, we can explore these different levels of causation, and we can address them one after the other. Yeah. And that's the fun part, right? I mean, is this a deficiency issue? Well, let's measure it. Is it a hormonal issue? Well, let's measure it. Is it a stress issue? Well, let's start to address that, right? There's some things we can't measure. We just start to address them. And the things we can measure, we measure, and that's science, right?
Sure.
There's a space between science and the art of what we do, and that's when we can't measure something. It doesn't mean we can't assess it.
Right.
We just cannot be precise about it. But the problem may not require precision. It may just require understanding. It may require compassion. Right. It may require time. It may require patience. These are important things. So
you said something that really struck me. I said we simplify to our own detriment, and I think that's just such a profound statement that's so applicable to a vast many areas of life. And this idea of, yes, we want to be able to keep things simple, but at the same time, when we go too far with it and we don't acknowledge the complexity of cases sometimes, and especially like you were saying, when it comes to the human body and health overall, there are so many different variables to consider. You brought up the idea of knee pain, or weight gain, or low energy, whatever symptom name you want to put out there. There are so many layers and so many variables to consider with this. And unfortunately, I think the general consumer is given so much oversimplified information to feed the simplicity of the symptoms that they're experiencing, that it's an issue that we run into all the time, and it sounds like it's something that you run into as well. We're constantly having to educate people about not necessarily every single variable that could go in, but just open the eyes to, hey, maybe that knee pain is actually not a knee issue. Hey, maybe your weight gain is actually not, a specifically weight-related issue. There are a number of things that can go in. That's great. So I'm really happy that you brought that up, because it's something that I think is really important for people to understand, that there's a simple answer, and then there's an answer that's just that is almost too simple in nature. And when you get to that too simple level, then you've kind of lost the ability to truly assess, to figure out what's going on, because you're just focused right where that symptom is. It's a great topic, Charlie, and I think it's a great assessment on your part. What we're talking about, and I discussed this with many of my patients and clients, is the concept of heuristics. And heuristics are shortcuts that we have. Our brains are designed to be efficient. They're not designed to be comprehensive, right? Right. And so we have all these shortcuts. And so this whole area of heuristics is very interesting. And one of the things that you're speaking to is availability bias. We tend to categorize things in what is available for us to understand at our particular level. And that's, if we're not trained, then we think in terms of whatever is there in the media, whatever is available in our world, and and that changes from generation to generation, different from individual to individual, right? When I was writing The Diamond Rule, and I republished it recently as The Man in the Mountain. We want to talk about that. Brought you a copy. Appreciate that. Absolutely, it's available on Amazon. Awesome. And what The Man in the Mountain, what it really talks to is, it talks to a system of organization. You use systems theory, and systems theory organizes conceptualization in terms of data, information, knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. And so at each level, you have more integration of data, but you have fewer sets of within that field.
So it's like almost like a pyramid, you can imagine,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of data points. You can think of language, for instance. Language is literally a line and a circle. You can make a B or a P or an A or
Sure.
wherever you want to make out of that.
configurations.
Right. And those letters then would be information. So data, information. So lines and circles are data. Language or letters within an alphabet are information, right? But that information may be different. It may be Cyrillic or it may be Latin script. So you may have different data sets. And all of a sudden you've got different data sets that are somewhat exclusive of one another, somewhat inclusive. So then we go to words, right? A data, information, knowledge. Words are knowledge, right? You say tree, I say tree, but there's value in that. We can talk about trees, but now there's also a hidden limitation. You may be thinking palm trees, I'm thinking pine trees. All of a sudden we're moving off in two different directions, right? So data, information, knowledge. And then you put that together in sentences, right? And you have a book. You can have a book, and then you can have a library of books, which is wisdom, right? So data, information, knowledge, understanding, wisdom, awareness. And I add awareness on top of that because when we are talking about stress, we have to talk about our system of configuring all of these things. Because that's what the man in the mountain really goes through, is how do we go about doing that to create stressful situations for ourselves? How do we misinterpret?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm speaking to you in Spanish, and you're speaking to me in English, or I'm speaking to you in Latin, and you're speaking, and we think we're communicating. We're really not. We're speaking English, and American English, and we may not be communicating, right? So there's misunderstandings that occur.
Interesting.
And so that's the simplification I talk about.
Sure. Very cool. Very, very cool. So tell us more about your practice right now. Kind of what assessments do you do with the patients that come in? How is it different than what they may experience in a traditional medical setting? Tell us more about kind of the day in and day out of what you do at your practice.
Right. Thanks, Charlie. The traditional practice of medicine, and there are many different people who practice medicine differently, but within that range, really what we're looking at are diseases, and we're looking at let's say you have a disease. How do we manage that disease? There are a few areas that may deal with prevention, such as looking at your cholesterol level, or looking at your blood pressure, or looking at your blood sugar. These are preventive areas,
Sure.
and that get a lot of attention. But heart disease is not cholesterol.
It's true.
Right?
That is true.
And so this is another simplification. Many patients that I encounter, for them, heart disease is synonymous with their cholesterol. My cholesterol is low, I'm not at risk for heart disease. Simply not true. Heart disease is there are many risk factors for heart disease. What is your what do your inflammatory markers look like? Specifically, what does your HSCRP look like? How does inflammation play a role in heart disease? It's a major risk factor for heart disease. It doesn't really get accounted for because it doesn't really get assessed, generally speaking, in the medical setting. We deal with inflammation on a daily basis.
Interesting.
We look at the causes for inflammation, right? How does toxicity management, what's the role of toxicity in heart disease? It plays a big role. That generally doesn't get addressed within the regular medical field, right? But it still plays a role. So in many senses, the billing system and the payment system has directed what constitutes preventive care.
Yeah.
And since checking A1C, hemoglobin A1C will get reimbursed from a medical standpoint. It gets checked, but insulin level may not. So what does the insulin level do? How does that help you? Helps you to understand what it is that's going on. Hemoglobin A1C is a difficult concept to understand and say, how is this applicable? But an insulin level, I can go and I can explain to my patients, how does your glucose and your insulin relate? How do they actually operate? People have diabetes. They don't even understand what insulin does in their body.
Sure.
That's a travesty, right? I mean, how much ownership do you have of your problem when you don't understand really the basic functioning of how what it is that you're doing every day,
right.
Modulating your insulin, how that impacts your body or what's going on in your body.
Yeah.
Right? We have time to discuss that. Our consultations, our follow-up appointments are 1 hour each.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, when we do our comprehensive consultation, Charlie, we're looking at hormonal areas, we're looking at genetic areas, we're looking at supplemental issues, we're looking at deficiencies, toxicities, we're looking at stress response management, and that initial consultation for our executive clients, for people who want to go through the comprehensive wellness assessment, it runs from 8:30 in the morning till 3:30 in the afternoon.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
Yeah, and it is full. Usually we run over because we don't have enough time.
Wow.
So you're looking at everything that you can.
We're looking at
least
thanks,
trying
Julie.
to.
Yeah, everything is huge. I appreciate that. But we're looking at all of the areas that I know of that are accessible with regards to the constituents of health that you can be proactive about. Right?
Yeah.
There's some things that we can't do anything about.
Sure.
What's the point of dealing with them? They just increase our stress.
Yeah, right.
But there's so much that we can do things about that we don't do, and we don't even know that we can't. Right? And so just to know what it is that's going on in your body and what you can do, then you get to choose. I want to work on this. I don't want to work on this. I want to do this. I don't think I want to do that. Hey, that's great. Then we can put it together for you specifically.
Very cool.
But at least having the awareness is cool, because I know when I go to the doctor, it's like, well, if I don't have any symptoms going on, I just do my checkup, listen to my heart, get my blood pressure, and routine blood work, So how would I know if something's going on if I don't have the symptom, or if I'm ignoring the symptom and I decide not to share, which I'm sure a lot of people do as well.
Well, you don't really know. You don't know, is this real enough for me to share, right? This is something, and some people want to share everything, and some people will say, it's no big deal, it'll go away.
Right.
So there's a huge range, right? But I think what you're pointing out, Julie, is really, really important. I get people in the emergency room and say, I can't be having a heart attack. I just got a checkup. I was okay. The checkup doesn't tell you you're okay. Right? There's no checkup that can tell you you're okay. The checkup just tells you that you're not currently experiencing a medical problem.
Interesting.
That we can assess, right?
Sure.
And so, I hear it so often that my heart's okay. I just got checked out. My doctor told me it's okay. Doesn't mean that everything is okay. It just means that there's nothing right now that needs to be addressed from a disease standpoint. There's nothing that's coming up as relevant on a prevention on these narrow areas, but that doesn't mean everything's okay.
Sure. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So you gather all this awesome data with your patients, and then kind of what's the next step? Do you put together a plan of action? Like, okay, discussing with them, like you're saying, we want to work on these areas. You're less interested in working on these areas. So, if weight's an issue or energy level's an issue, okay, these are the things that could be factoring into it. And so talk to us about that. And then what kind of recommendations do you make? Is it nutrition? Is it lifestyle? Is it exercise, stress management? How does that all come in?
Great. Thank you, Charlie. The assessment actually takes about a month to complete.
Wow.
So if I see somebody in my office today, we'll schedule an appointment in a month or a month and a half, because it takes that long to get the testing done. There's questionnaires with regards to stress response management and particular organ functions that I need to get completed. They come back to me. We do blood testing that includes inflammatory markers. We look at allergies and how those might be contributing to problems. We look at deficiencies. We look at hormone balance. But we look at hormone balance across the whole spectrum.
Gotcha.
If you can see an endocrinologist, you might get you may be seeing them for your thyroid. We're looking at your thyroid. We're looking at your estrogen, progesterone, your testosterone, your DHEA, your cortisol levels. So we're looking really broadly at hormone balance, DHEA. We're looking at all of these things. Then we look at genetics. We look at genetics to optimize function, not genetics for diseases. What diseases are you prone to? We're looking at how do you optimize your function. What is the role of exercise incrementally for you in decreasing your HDL levels, or decreasing your LDL levels, and increasing your HDL levels? That is a piece of data that you might find useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? What is the role incrementally of exercise for you in managing your insulin resistance for diabetes? That may be relevant, right?
Sure.
What is a diet that would help you to optimize your health? One of 4 diets. Which one is it genetically?
Yeah.
Right? So this is information that you can use to actually make a plan for yourself that integrates across these different domains of exercise, diet, toxicity, deficiency, as well as diet.
Sure. Very cool.
Yep.
Very cool. And then talk to us, because we've been to your office. Your office is just gorgeous.
And really unique.
Really unique.
Yeah.
Really unique. So tell us, because there's a whole kind of stress management practice or aspect to your practice and to your office. tell us how you kind of integrate that with your patients, and what kind of recommendations you give from a activity standpoint, a meditation standpoint, things like that.
Yeah. I think that that we underestimate very often the role of the emotional part of what it is that makes us up with regards to our health. We don't want to just be healthy. We want to feel healthy, right? And we want to feel good about what it is that we're doing. We want to be, and stress lies right at that intersection, because it's about how you think and about how you feel. And so if we just address how you think, we're not going to get to the root of the problem.
Sure.
And we have to look at how you feel. We have to address how you're feeling, right? And so that's a much more complicated. The structure to that is very different than the structure to looking at your cholesterol level and looking at HDL and your LDL.
Sure.
But we have to be careful that we don't just get lost in that rational space, that we also look at the space that adds value with regards to how it is that you're processing all of this, you know. So, and stress plays a big part. So does meditation play a role? It may play a role for individuals. Does yoga play a role? It may play a role for individuals. Exercise in a generic sense may play a role. Exercise in a specific sense. What exercise is right for you, right? And so some people, there may be exercises that people have never explored, and they may be wonderful exercises for them. They haven't really looked at that. But in the office, we can work with yoga. We can work with meditation, and I do work with that for particular patients and people who want to explore that. There can be profound benefits from a stress management standpoint.
Very cool. Very cool. I remember distinctly one aspect of your office that I thought was so neat was the water fountain, that when you flip the switch.
I was just thinking about that.
Yeah.
I flipped the switch.
Yeah. So tell them the story, because I thought this was such a neat touch that kind of tied in the entire office.
So we're doing the tour, and there's this water fountain in the back. And I
looks like it's out of Italy, right?
It's like all stone or something. Exactly. Yeah. And I flip it on, and then it had a delayed start, and I was like, Dr. Dhillon, I think your water fountain's a little broken. You might want to get it fixed. And then he's like, actually, that's a big an intentional thing where things that we desire in life don't always happen the way we expect them to, or I think it was some kind of lesson like that, and I was like, oh, okay. Yeah,
it was really cool. It was really cool, because it took
just all the thought that was put into the space. I think.
It was an incredibly really thoughtful touch, and I really I remember that moment really stood out to me as well. It's
incredible, isn't it? It still sticks with you, isn't it? It's amazing how we deal with time. Right? I mean, our lives, it said that, our lives that are too short are made up of moments that are too long. And so we spend all these times, when is this going to end? I'm going to be here forever.
Sure.
These moments are so long, we get to the end of our lives, that happened so fast. Right? And so, that moment stuck with you because it was not what you expected. It was not part of your ordinary. Right. You kind of assume that things are going to happen efficiently, that things are going to... And it's one of the downsides of living in such an efficient society is that we get upset about the least inefficiency, right? We can go to the grocery store, standing behind some lady who's checking her coin or change, and she's paying, and it's going so slow, and we're getting upset. And in the meantime, we don't realize that we have access to almost every food in the world. You could make Thai food today.
That's right.
You could travel around the world, right? 50 years ago, that wasn't the case. You would have mashed potatoes and your gravy, or you could have turkey, and you could have a TV dinner, right? But you couldn't have Thai food. You couldn't go and shop between GMO versus non-GMO.
Right.
Well, it wasn't an issue 50
sure.
years. But I'm just saying that there is so much that we have to be grateful for. That time is a big stressor. Time is a stressor for everybody. What is time? It's such a fluid thing. There's you look at, and we can get into long discussions of quantum gravity and how that affects our thoughts of time. There actually is very little that if we talk about memories, I mean, time is a very personal thing, right? It really is built upon your memories. You remember that incident at our office, right? You both remembered it, right? you remembered it because it was a disruption in the flow of the ordinary, right? And if you think about the events in your life that have been particularly joyful, particularly scary, particularly stick out to you, they are disruptions in the ordinary.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So if we want to experience joy in our lives, how do we encounter more disruptions of the ordinary that we find awe-inspiring? How's that for a question?
I love that. That is awesome.
Yeah.
That is just awesome. Yeah.
So if you want health,
Honor that.
if you want health,
Yeah.
right? What are you doing today? And what are you going to do today to help yourself feel awe-inspired? Because that is going to be a cause. That's going to be a source of joy for you.
Sure.
And how much less stress are you going to have because that? And how much of your stressful thoughts? How are you going to put those into perspective? When you've got these awe-inspiring things going on.
Yeah.
You know, I was walking outside. I just came out of work a couple of days ago, and there was this. Happened to be in Texas. There's this big, giant double rainbow,
Whoa.
right? And where I was at, there was a Walmart right in front of it, right?
Yeah.
I see myself, God, if that Walmart weren't there, then. But I'm looking at this. Am I paying attention to the Walmart? Am I paying attention to this awesome double rainbow that didn't break up at the top, right? It was just like solid all the way, right?
Yeah.
And how rare is that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I was thinking to myself, this is a great opportunity to either look at the rainbow or to look at this store.
Sure.
Right.
Which do I choose?
Sure.
Yeah. It's a good perspective because I think we always have, the options.
Right. That's right, Julie. I agree.
And sometimes we're even drawn to the worst option, like how you instinctually is like, I wish the Walmart wasn't there,
right?
Which drew your attention away from the beauty in front of you.
Yeah. But then when I was staring up at it, people were looking at me and smiling, right? So
Sure.
So and then and then they were looking back, like, I didn't see that, right? And so your joy, your participation in a joyful event, brings other people to that event, right? And then that's a secondary source of joy, right? Yeah. So these all help with stress, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful.
Helps me with my stress just hanging out with you guys.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Dhillon, some questions that we kind of like to wrap up with is if there are, 1 to 3 things that you would recommend our listeners to start doing like immediately to help with their overall health, kind of what might those things be? They don't have to be like your top 3, but what are some things that you think are really good recommendations across the board?
Right. Well, let's start with the first one, and it's free. It's stress. It's what we were just talking about. Don't let your life be a run-on sentence. Let it be punctuated by moments of uniqueness. Let it be punctuated by moments that you either choose or put yourself in a position where they happen serendipitously.
Yeah.
I love hiking. Hiking is great, right? Because I will stumble upon something, hopefully not literally stumble, but I will just come upon something that I was not expecting, right? Just coming out and seeing that rainbow, stopping, pulling over and just enjoying it, right? We just drive by and we're like, okay, that was good. Now we'll do this.
Sure.
That was the joyful thing of the day, right?
Yeah.
So the first thing is stress. Minimize try to come to a resolution between things that seem to be conflicting in your life so that you can actually help to resolve them. And if you need help with that, get help, because that's going to be the biggest value for you, is to minimize your stress, right? The second one I would say is really get familiar with gut health. Gut health is something we haven't really talked about, spent a lot of time talking about it. And you're going to be hearing more and more about it in the decades to come because people are just starting to understand it. People are just starting to understand the significance of it. And so something I spend a lot of time talking about in the office during a consultation.
Awesome.
Inflammation and gut health.
Very cool.
And the third thing is I would say get data. Get measurements. Even if you're not going to do anything with them, just have the measurements. You never know that you may not want to do something today, but it sits in your mind. You say, I've got to get back to that. I've got to do that, right? Sure. But I would say get measurements. Get your hormone levels checked. Get your blood levels checked. Get your inflammatory markers checked. Get these things checked. And we're happy to do that. In fact, we offer in our office, we can get about $3,000 worth of this complete blood test done for about $270.
Wow, that's a tremendous savings. Right? That's awesome.
Right. So you don't have to deal with insurance or anything else. It's $270. Awesome. You can get all these done. Wow. And then we'll review them with you. And that's the consultation, is the review.
Sure.
But the blood tests are simple. You can get them done. And Yeah,
that's awesome. So on that note, tell us where our listeners can find out more about you, find out more about Physicians Total Wellness, find more about your book.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. We're really easy to find, obviously. Our website is www.well2excel.com, WELLTOEXCEL.com, well2excel.com. And you can always call us. Our phone number is 847-466-4602.
Nice.
And you can always call us there and get in touch with us. If not, the website has phone numbers, has the email communication to get in touch with us. And then there's the book, The Man in the Mountain. It's on Amazon, and if you want to just take a look at it and kind of get a feel for what it is that we might be doing at Physicians Total Wellness, I'm happy to share that with you too.
Awesome. Very cool. Now, the question that we always end with, and that you kind of answered earlier, but I want you to touch on it again and expand on it, is, what is your definition of health? And how you brought it up earlier is the ability to live your life to the fullest that you can. Now, how would it, that is, I just love that statement. I love that perspective. Can you expand on that? And what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So, Charlie, I think most people consider health the absence of disease.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the traditional concept. If you ask anybody, well, I'm healthy, that means I don't have a disease process.
Right.
But as we were talking about earlier, just because you got a checkup doesn't mean you're okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if you really want to know that you're not having the potential, really the question is, look, anything can happen at any time.
Sure.
We're talking about probabilities, and how do you minimize the probability of a disruption to your life from a disease standpoint,
mm-hmm.
right? Then the answer is get the information, be as fully informed as you possibly can,
mm-hmm.
to the extent that you want to make decisions about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you don't want to make decisions about things, then don't look for the data. But if you want to make decisions, you want to be proactive. To the extent you can be proactive,
mm-hmm.
then get the data.
Sure.
Find out what's going on below the surface that you might need to attend to, right? If we find out that you are pre-diabetic, right? Now you have an opportunity, you have an incentive now to exercise. You have an incentive to go ahead and lose weight. You have an incentive to, it's an objective incentive. And some people need objective incentives,
mm-hmm.
right? Okay, I've been burning the candle at both ends. Now it's almost about the car's about ready to fall apart. Well, what can we do to keep that from happening? Right? So getting the data, knowing and understanding what's going on below the surface mm-hmm. that could result in disease. If that's health, then that's great. So health is whatever it is that helps you mm-hmm. to function in your life, mm-hmm. as we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
But I think that testing is important. I think that if you are globally concerned and you're proactive, getting testing done to the full extent is helpful, because we want to make sure you are able to live your life in a joyful way.
Love that.
Beautiful.
Love that. Dr. Dhillon, thank you so much for joining us. We
Charlie.
really appreciate your time.
No, thank you, Charlie.
Really appreciate your expertise. It's just so much fun having you on. Thank you.
And we'll make sure to link the website, the phone number, and then also links to Dr. Dhillon's book in the notes. So if you want to refer to those, we will have the links for you there.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks, Charlie.
Now, to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We always appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to the messages that we're trying to share. And if you know somebody that you think would benefit from listening to this interview with Dr. Dhillon, feel free to share it with them. Who do you know that would benefit greatly from hearing this information or from learning of the work that Dr. Dhillon is doing? Send this podcast over to them and help them out. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week.